Okay, welcome back to the chapter or the content area overview. Again, with this first test of second test of the third quarter, but this first test within content area 3, we are going to be discussing late antiquity, Byzantine, and early medieval arts. So first we're going to go through late antiquity and Byzantine arts. So know that this early Judeo-Christian works of art are just as Roman as that imperial statuary. If you remember way back when at the beginning of the year we discussed that veristic and Roman sculptures and how realistic and classical they were. They're beautiful. The chapter, if you're following along with chapters 8 and 9, this chapter allows that bridge between Roman and medieval times, ancient into more modern. The overview we had today kind of discussed that as well. So this is the area that we're looking at. Let me pull I can't pull my screen down. Okay, so we're here. We've got Greece. We have Turkey. Constantinople is here. We've discussed this where there was a split, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. A split between Eastern and Western Europe, basically, or Roman empires. So we see early Christian works first in Dura-Rippidos. It's a city which was called Dura by the Romans and Europos by the Greeks. So that's why it's Dura-Rippidos. There's kind of a back and forth between Greek and Romans at this time. Marcus Aurelius placed permanent control, which we know Marcus Aurelius as being Roman. The Sasanians took control. Rome kind of ran, leaving Euripidos or Dura-Rippidos, like Pompeii of the desert. So it was just kind of left. So then the Sasanians conquered the Persian Empire. Constantine signed the Edict of Milan in 313. But this Dura-Rippidos are one of the first glimpses that we have of early Christian religion. So here's a painting within there. We've got what we're having here, I believe, is look at the style here. The figures are static. They're not without action. They're stiff. The figures are fully frontal and stylized. So what we're looking at here is a reconstruction of Christian community house. So again, the Christians had to practice in secret. So this occurred generally within people's houses. So the Christian community house at Dura-Rippidos, this is Syria, was remodeled. It was a private residence which was remodeled, had a central court. So this right here is the courtyard of the private house, which the Christians would converge and have their ceremony or their practices. So the catacombs were another place. This is the catacombs of Priscilla. And what we're seeing here, these catacombs were underground tunnels, basically. They would house the dead, but they were also a central place for Christians to worship in secret. We're looking here at Old St. Peter's. So the Edict of Milan in 313, Christians began building churches, usually on sites of famous martyrs. So supposedly this was the site where St. Peter was buried. Early churches were modeled after Roman basilicas. We'll see this continue throughout the medieval times as well. They didn't have cult statues, though, because it was against their practice to worship idols. Peter was the founder of Christianity in Rome. He was martyred under Nero. We discussed Nero when we talked about Rome. Horrible, horrible man. The Renaissance and Baroque there was a replacement of this basilica. So this is the old St. Peter's. It's no longer there. Or this structure is no longer there. So it's on an axial plan. We'll talk more about that. We'll also talk about terms like atrium, narthex, nave, transept, apse, each of them having their own function. So this longitudinal orientation with the entrance at one side leading directly to the apse, unlike the Basilica of Constantine, which we talked about in the overview in Rome. This is a Roman basilica. So again, Old St. Peter's, here are some definitions, or here are some terms of structure, architectural structure you need to know. We've got the atrium, which is like an open house. This one has a fountain gatehouse, so there's always an entrance. The nave is that central aisle or line. Transept is always the apertures that are coming off of here. We've got the apse, which typically is where the altar is. Clerestory, we've talked about this already. It is kind of the second layer. So if we look back up in here, this section right here is the clerestory. It allows for light to come in and for a more grand nave. We also talked about a clerestory within Egyptian times. They come equipped with side aisles. Ta-da! Right here and right here. They're, the original basilicas were made of wood, and then they've kind of lost the use of cement. So they typically were made of wood and didn't have those strong domes and things. So here is a central plan. We've got the ambulatory, which we've discussed the ambulatory before. It is like a side aisle in this axle plan. So this is considered an axle plan here. So then we've got this central plan. We've got columns typically in the middle, a narthex, which again is that kind of open, and then the ambulatory that is kind of like a side aisle, but this is a central style plan. Santa Costana is, Costanza is a centrally planned structure. There's an altar in the center. The aisles surround the altar and are barrel vaulted. We've discussed that before. 12 columns, or 12 column pairs and 12 clerestory windows. So it still has a clerestory, which is this up in here, to allow light to enter into the altar area. This was possibly a mausoleum for Constantia, and it was later converted into a church. So this is a diptych. A diptych was traditionally used as a portable altar, meaning there were two panels that could fold into each other. So here are two different types of diptychs. Some were made of ivory. This would be considered late antiquity relief. So Santa Sabina, this is one of our artifacts, and we will go into Santa Sabina more whenever we discuss our artifacts. So here we see mosaics occurring in ancient antiquity. As we go further into this and into Byzantine art, you will definitely see where we've moved a shift from this classical, beautifully, realistically rendered form and structure into something that's more stylized, into something that's very stylized. So we see a lot of mosaics. The mosaics in Byzantine art, which we haven't gotten there quite yet, show a lot of golds, a lot of illumination. A lot of that was to reflect the light in a lot of these spaces. So, again, we're looking here at this late antiquity style of art. This looks very similar to some of the frescoes that we saw in the catacombs of Priscilla. So, to know here, this is Galla Placidia. In 380, Theodosius I, after Constantine's reign, established Christianity as its official religion, abolishing Roman gods, and Theodosius set Christianity as the official religion. Theodosius died in about 395, and power passed to two of his sons, which were the East Emperor and the West Emperor. Again, they talked about this in the crash course that we watched. After many different captures of capital cities, which were established at the time, Ravenna fell to Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 539. So we have that split between East and Western Rome. And the mausoleum, this mausoleum was originally a Galla Placidia, which was the West Emperor half sister. So it was a mausoleum for her. Yeah. Okay. So Byzantine, we're getting into Byzantine. So we just went through late antiquity, where the forms are stylized. If you look at these diptychs, they're again becoming much more stylized to where it was less stylized previously. We don't see as many icons. And we're looking at these two structures of the axial plan and the central plan of architecture. So moving back into, sorry, didn't mean to make you go sick there, Chapter 9, Byzantium here. So again, we've got the split. It's split between early Byzantine, middle Byzantine, and late Byzantine, just like all art periods. We will see a big shift in stylized art here. So Byzantine, this area over here with Constantinople is considered Byzantium. And then over here we've got the Roman Catholics. But all of these people in these areas are considering themselves Romans. It's just who was the right Roman. All right. So, little historical background about Byzantium. Byzantine people called themselves Romans. We talked about that. Byzantine Empire born from a split of the two Roman worlds. The size of Roman Empire was just too huge for one person to rule. So again, we've got the Eastern and that Western. Byzantine spoke Greek rather than Latin. We were talking about Constantine being able to speak Greek better than Latin. So this is just continuing to carry over. It promotes Orthodox Christianity as opposed to Western Christianity, which was centered in Rome. So Western Christianity was centered in Rome, where Orthodox Christianity was centered in Constantinople. Constantinople was the envy of every culture, trading center of Europe, controlled shipment of goods nearly everywhere. It influenced Byzantine art. The influence of Byzantine art spread everywhere because of missionaries or merchants. Precious objects carried across the Mediterranean. Everybody in Byzantium thought that the Western objects were barbaric. Remember, there's kind of a lack of rule in Western Christianity at this time. Icons were images that act as reminders to the faithful, not intended to be sacred for the sacred persons themselves. So they were not meant to be worshipped themselves, but they were meant to help for worship. We've seen this in Buddhist art a lot. They kind of got carried away with icons, though. Some worshipped them as idols, which was a big no-no. The patronage, church plus state, is the same thing. It was all the Byzantine Empire. Religious works, crowded buildings. We've got interest in luxury objects as well. So extravagant works in ivory, manuscripts, and precious metals. Artists feel like they create art for the glory of God. So we see a lot of, in this period for a long time until we hit the Renaissance, art was created for the church. I lied. When we hit Romanesque, kind of took us back a little bit, but pretty much until we get to the Renaissance, it's all religious art. Many artists were priests, nuns, or monks. Artistic production was an expression of their religious devotion. And I'm on the right slide. Okay. So, we've got the golden age of early Byzantine began with Justinian in 537. A distinctive Byzantine style emerged during the reign of Justinian in the 6th century. We've got relief carvings on ivory panels, reveal sources in late antique art used to express the unique character of Eastern Christian culture. churches built in Constantinople and Ravenna, and the fortress monasteries built in Mount Sinai in Egypt are typically planned on the exterior but lavishly decorated with mosaics on the inside. So not super decorative outside, but very decorative inside. As far as paintings, notable paintings are manuscripts, typically. Yep, okay, moving on. So again, here are some relief carvings in ivory. This is the Archangel Michael. We've got ivory carvings. It's a part of a diptych. So what you're noticing here is you're noticing classical characteristics. So we've got this clinging fabric, these beautiful folds. However, as far as perspective, we're not seeing this in perspective. His feet are enormous compared to these steps. They're hanging off of it. Part of his body are behind these columns, and part of it is in front. So it's a new meaning. It's bringing new meaning into art. They're trying to back away from this classical style of realism. So these images, these icons, are not looking so real that you could talk to them. So that would possibly prevent them from worshiping them as idols and thinking of them as having agency or having a personality of themselves, a spirit of themselves. They are just images there to help with devotion and religion. So this is a codex. Now, if you've taken an art class with me, we do in Art 2 or 2D exploration, we do a codex. A codex is a book of constructive of a number of sheets of paper, vellum, papyrus, those sort of things, painted on there. So we'll talk a lot about manuscripts and codex and things like that. What you're seeing here, especially on the left, is a scientific codex. Okay, so we are now on slide 20. So Emperor Justinian from 527 to 565, it was the first golden age of Byzantine art. Justinian's generals drove invading armies out of the Roman Empire and coded Roman law into a great work known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Code of Laws. This code of civil law became a foundation of law system of modern European nations. Empire almost rivaled Rome at this time, so it was getting close to that glory of Rome. Constantine had sponsored Christianity. Theodosius made it its official religion, and Justinian proclaimed Christianity as the only lawful religion. So tables began to turn. So what we're seeing here is this ivory panel, this ivory diptych, or part of a diptych. It was acquired by Cardinal Francisco Barberini. So down here, we've got Roman barbarians at the bottom panel down here. Animals to show that Justinian conquered and reclaimed from these barbarians and made them into Christians. So it's putting him over these barbarian pagans. The left side, we've got a winged figure. Right there, this gentleman here is holding a winged figure. And Christ at the top holding a cross and anointing Justinian as the one true ruler. So we're going to talk about Hagia Sophia, but not a whole lot, because this is one of our artifacts, so we'll go into it more. So Hagia Sophia was built at one time, but in 558 the first dome collapsed. They were having structural issues. The buttresses are an addition from the original after the Ottoman conquest in 1453, and it became a mosque after that. So building is now a museum. It might to be transformed into a Muslim shrine. So we're not going to talk again about a whole lot of Hagia Sophia, because we will talk about this extensively in our artifact discussion. So it was the largest dome in the world up until during the Renaissance. Again, here's some more. This would be considered what? An axle or centrally planned? Think on that. Okay. So what you do need to know about constructing, about architecture at this time is how to support these huge domes. So there's two different types. There are pendentives and squinches, two ways to elevate and support a dome. A pendentive provides the transition from square area below the dome to a circular base of the dome. So on the left there, we've got a pendentive. If you see this here, it's rounded. And then over here we have a squinch. Squinch is square, and then they put like this spaceship-looking thing on top of it. It is just, personally, I believe that this probably flows a little bit better, but it just depends on the architect and his taste and styles. So Ravenna, greatest cultural and economic prosperity during Justinian. Again, Ravenna was a central town area. Let's keep going. So this would be a centrally planned church. So the design incorporates two concentric octagons surrounded by 8 piers alternating with carved niches. So we've got these niches here, we've got the piers here, we've got this side aisle, we've got the nave, apse, narthex. Again, these are terms you really need to know. San Vital, if you look at all of the beautiful mosaics, Christianity tried or attempted to recreate their own type of capital. So this is, right here, we've got these impost blocks. This is very Christian, early Christian or Byzantine. They, when we look at Byzantine art, again, we see a lot of golds everywhere. We've got blues. Byzantine art was very much mosaic tile. And we have Theodora and Justinian. One here, one there. So Theo and Justin here, the figures are individualized except for the soldiers. We're going to talk more about this. Again, this is one of our artifacts. So we're not going to go into it in a lot of depth, but look here at all of these are mosaics. So look at the detail, look at the floating feet. You don't really know where people go, or the perspective is really off, but they do this intentionally, and you'll find this out over the reading that I've assigned for you this weekend. You'll also see that. So compare and contrast. We have classical work over here on the right, and we have Byzantine work over here on the left. The shift from classical to this Byzantine kind of stylized shift was intentional because of iconoclasm. Well, because of the out of the 10 Commandments, not wanting to worship false idols. These look so realistic, and these not so much. So it's easier to not see these. It's easier to see these as real people or real gods, and to not see these as real people or real gods. So the average person is not going to be duped into thinking that these are actually real people. So it's not because of a lack of skill or talent. After a while, that could possibly be the case because the practice of classical was so out of whack. But in the beginning, it was not because of a loss of knowledge. It was because it was an intentional shift. So Byzantine recap. We've got a floating figure, feet that are not supporting a body weight. They're always kind of angled down a little bit. Typically, we see a lot of halos, we see a lot of gold, mosaic tile, mix of imperial and Christianity works. So it's that mix of imperial arts, or imperial Roman style, and that late antiquity or Byzantine Christian kind of style where they're trying to take it away out of classical. Large hands, large eyes, shifting eyes. They're never looking directly at you. They are typically looking off to one side. We've got overlapping and head clusters. So if you look down here, head clusters, we only see pairs of feet for these people, but oh my goodness, look at all these people behind them. They must just be floating. Whew. So, early Byzantine versus late antiquity. So late antiquity, we still see some of those classical elements. But Byzantine, this is much more stylized in design rather than realistic perspective. Same thing. So, keep going. All right, so Mount Sinai in Egypt. This is Mount Sinai up here. We're going to talk about the term mandorla. That stops. Mandorla down. This is considered a mandorla. This right here. So it's almost like an aura that's surrounding typically an egg-shaped. Hold on, I lost my place on my notes. There we go. So, monostaticism. Okay, freeze. Sorry, back up here. Mount Sinai, right there. So monks began in Egypt on Mount Sinai in about the 3rd century and spread east to west. So it began as a migration to the wilderness of people seeking spiritual way of life. So basically, they were kind of recluses. They wanted to take things back to being simple so they could better glorify God. Thousands of people fled for this reason. Eventually, many monks formed a commune regulated and directed by an abbot. So, think almost hippies, guys. Think modern time hippies. Only their sole purpose instead of free love would have been, or freedom, free love would have been religion. Justinian rebuilt the monastery of Mount Sinai between 548 and 565. Churches dedicated to the Virgin Mary in the 8th. Transfiguration of Jesus. Other churches, okay, so some churches were dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Other churches were dedicated to Moses receiving the laws in the burning bush. So, we see a lot of purple. We see a lot of gold. We've got this mandorla, which is typically around Jesus to show that he is the one true God. Yeah. Or the one true focus of Christianity. And then we go to manuscripts. These are gospel books. Monks typically were the ones to create these because they were the only ones to be able to read and write. And we're going to keep going on through here. There we go. So here's some more look at some manuscripts. Okay, iconoclasm. Dun dun dun. So iconoclasm then came. It basically was the iconoclasm was the breaker of images. They thought that like the Muslims when we went through Muslim art that they did not want to worship any sort of idols or icons. So, what we've got here, again, this is one of our artifacts, so I'm not going to go into it very much, but we have the Virgin Mary here. We've got ugly baby Jesus, and I say ugly baby Jesus because they intentionally made them this way. We'll talk more about that and the reason why. But if you notice a lot through especially Byzantine art, and early religious art, that the babies look pretty stinking funky. So the Virgin Mary is also known as Theotokos. We see this here. We see the glancing eyes. We see the non-static feet. We see the head clusters kind of happening. Okay. So Middle Byzantine art. Keep going. So this is an early Byzantine church. This is a Middle Byzantine church. Notice the similarities and the differences between the two. So this is the monastery of Hosiolokos in Greece, first quarter of the 11th century. We've got the central dome. This is a different plan, and it kind of veers off of the central plan and the axial plans, but that's okay. Okay. Pantocrator is a ruler of all, usually applied to Christ in the role of judge in mankind. So, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost kind of thing. So it's a combination of what we're seeing here in Middle Byzantine is a combination between painterly late antiquity and Byzantine style. It's more organic and naturalistic mix. So we're coming away from less stiff form. The eyes are typically drawn upward into the dome of this church or this cathedral because of all of this gold. So at one point, all of this was made of gold. And so it would have really glowed, especially with these lights from the clerestory coming in. So when we see this here, this would be a Pantocrator. This is Christ in the role of Pantocrator. So to talk a little bit about the roles of women in Byzantine Empire, so Empress Irene abolished iconoclasm for a bit. Empress Theodora was Justinian's queen, and she fully abolished iconoclasm. And then we've got Empress Zoe, who reigned for a while actually as emperor, or empress. Emperor. Keep going. Sorry guys, hold on. Okay. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes. So Middle Byzantine art was the return of image makers. Middle Byzantine art emerges in the wake of the iconoclastic period with the renewal of image making and the need for refurbished surfaces and neglected churches, including Hagia Sophia. Undoing iconoclasm happened in 867. The Macedonian dynasty dedicated a new mosaic in the apse of Hagia Sophia. The inscriptions marked the end of iconoclasm. So, we're going to keep going through here. We've got St. Mark's. We've got that Pantocrator, the top figure. Jesus as Pantocrator. Theotokos and Child right here as the middle figures. Again, Pantocrator is Christ as the ruler of heaven and earth. And then what we've got, this is a triptych. A triptych, a diptych is 2 panels. A triptych has 3. These were definitely portable panels that were used as a shrine for devotion. So this is made of ivory, and if you look at all of the figures here, the figures are still, their robes are not identifying any sort of body or figure. It's still out of proportion, but we've got that flattening of feet becoming more realistic. And this is, again, becoming even closer to emotion and realism. This is the most emotion we've seen. This lamentation is not the normal full frontal of the Middle Byzantine Empire, and it contrasts against yellows and blues, so we've got that contrast between the yellow and the blue. We've got an emotional expression, impactful. This painting was very impactful for the Renaissance painters. This was considered the Macedonian Renaissance, which is a label that's sometimes used to describe the period of art in Macedonian dynasty of the Byzantine Empire, especially in the 10th century, which some scholars have seen as a time of increased interest in classical scholarship and the assimilation of classical motifs. Okay, what we're seeing here is we're becoming more classical. We've got David composing the Psalms. This is a folio. So this is a revival style. Artistic value on the Greco-Roman past. Again, this is Macedonian Renaissance. David the harpist right there, if you look at the red. We've got Melody, which is in the blue. And then we have Echo, which is in the purple. And this guy down here on the lower right is supposed to be a symbol of the mountain of Bethlehem. So we're still seeing the subject matter as being highly religious. However, we're going more into a classical style now. So we're gaining that classical look back again. We've got the Virgin of Compassion. So notice the abstraction of the figure. We've got the long straight nose, the small mouth, the flat silhouette. It's been frequently repainted by inferior artists, so it doesn't have its original surface quality at all. Crusaders attacked and sacked the city of Constantinople. It was the Fourth Crusade. The Byzantine Orthodox Church broke with Rome, the Church of Rome, and the Latins came across Byzantium to fight. So late Byzantine architecture became more elaborate and dramatic, with more intricate patternings and rhythmically grouped details, which also appear on the exterior of buildings. Late Byzantine. So the late Byzantine aesthetics can be described as a conventional vision of a spiritual world unsusceptible to change. We see a lot of mural and icon paintings become more livelier and less abstracted. So if we recap in Byzantine art started with very stylized figures, then moved to more kind of a mix between the two, and now we are becoming again more livelier and less abstract. Forms are more fluid, but also more formal. The late Byzantine period icons were often painted on two sides because they were intended to be carried in parades, which was down here further. Sorry, I kind of jumped the gun on that. So icon paintings flourished then in Russia. We're still seeing all of that. So food for thought. What influences from Imperial Rome art are seen in early Middle Ages and early, middle, and late Byzantine, not Middle Ages, sorry about that. How does the context change? What are some specific ways that spiritual ideas are expressed in Byzantine art? What do you think are the most significant qualities of Byzantine art? So I'd like for you to jot down those answers to those, 4 questions actually? There's 4 there. Bring them in when you come in after this recap, and we will go over those. Those must be included in your overview, notes. If you don't have those in there, I know that you didn't make it to the end of the lecture. So have a great time, and I will see you guys when we all come back. Thanks.